to what we now call Hempstead, and bought all that we call, not just the village of Hempstead, but the entire town of Hempstead. For today, what is equivalent to, I learned, less than $100. What a piece of real estate deal, Ella Valson. They came over from Connecticut and they wanted to start, new settlement here, and they came over and met with several native tribes, and for a few trinkets, they bought what is now the entire town of Hempstead. For today, what is equivalent to, less than $100. Man, talk about a steal. That is indeed a real estate steal. And so my mind sometimes, when I think about these things, I kind of wonder, what was it like in those days? And so, when I read the Bible, I kind of think the same thing. What was, the time of Christ, what was life like? What was daily life like? I kind of try to imagine Christ, and I know in your mind and in my mind, we have, whatever pictures were created and created in various ways. But I want to look at a few things concerning daily life. And we look at kind of how these interferes with, how we read scripture and how we see the teachings of Christ. So daily life. Let's talk about home life. Home life. What was home life like for Christ and for the people in the time of Christ? Let's talk a little bit about their houses. Now, houses were, they, don't get me wrong. There were those who were wealthy enough to afford, pristine homes and perhaps large, what we'll consider to be mansions, made with, beautiful, perhaps marble and all of this, because in the Roman world that did exist. And so those who had wealth had the ability to build with, fine cut stone and all of that. But we are talking about the ordinary person, the everyday home of the everyday person. And so this is just, a little kind of concept, perhaps, of what the home looked like. It was very humble. There were quarters for your animal right outside the home, and so both animal and people inhabit pretty much the same space. Life was very, common, very ordinary, if you call it that, in terms of the home. But this is an example, perhaps, of what a home might have looked like, to give you some idea. You'll see, for example, you see storage, and it kind of helps you to understand when there is no room in the inn, and the Christ child is born in a manger. This is typically and commonly what that may have looked like. It was not necessarily something out behind the house. These storage area with mangers and for animals were often very connected to the house. People were very close to the animals, and so it could be that when we think about the manger, it's not something necessarily far off across the field, way in the back of the house. It may just be a space on the house, on the inn, that was allocated for the animals. And so because the people and the animal dwell in close proximity to each other, when there was no room in the house, in the inn, there was that space meant for animals. There was that space that was made available for Joseph and for Mary. Sometimes we hear about the upper room, and here are some steps leading to what they consider an upper room. So you had a lower level, and sometimes a few steps that would lead into an upper room. So when we read in Acts, the book of Acts, when we read in the gospel that for the Passover, they went to an upper room. This is probably something that may have looked like just a step up from the ordinary dwelling that was considered an upper room for them to dwell in. Very, very ordinary. Now, this is just to give you an idea. In Mark chapter 2, for example, we read a story, about the four friends who brought their friends to Jesus, and because the crowd was there and there was no room in the house, there was no room. They could not take their friend who needed healing even through the door, and they took him up to the rooftop, and they broke up the roof and let him down. In my mind, before I understood how houses were built, I kind of always imagined that these guys, and my mind was trying to figure, well, how did they get him up to the roof in the first place? While many people were thinking about, well, they broke up the roof, I was trying to figure, did they use a ladder? Did they have to do some climbing with this guy? Well, one of the things that we know is that houses in those days were built in such a way that they were actually a staircase or steps leading up to what we would consider to be the roof. And so they didn't have to use a ladder because it was very ordinary. In fact, it was also common that the roof level was also part of the dwelling. It was not uncommon for them to to do things up there and to utilize the top of the house. So when they took the friends up, they actually had easy access. They didn't need a ladder to design any contraptions to take him up. They really had easy access to the roof. And you know the story from Mark chapter 2. And because of the material from which the house was made, it was not so difficult, to break up the roof. They were pretty much, pulling up the straw to cover the roof and whatever, beams that were used made of pieces of wood. It was not so very difficult for them with determination to lower their friends down after having climbed those staircases onto a flat roof. These were not pitch roofs like we may have today, and they were trying to do some, acrobatic maneuvers. They had a flat roof that was occupied for various things, and they would have been able to easily climb up to the roof. What about clothing? What did they wear? We kind of talk about where they live and how they live, but what did they wear during those times? Well, clothing was also very simple. Life was simple. It was not, a lot of designer fashion. And I'm not saying that they were not elegant garments, perhaps that the wealthy wore. But again, remember when we are talking here, we have in mind an ordinary, everyday person. And so very, very typical of the time, they wore what is called, that word is hiton. The C is silent, so they wore what is called a hiton. That would be a light inner robe, inner garment, something similar to what you see here, that they often wore. The challenge of that was it was long, most of the time down to the ankles, worn by both men and women, and so it made it very difficult to do certain activities for those who are active. For example, if you wanted to run, I don't know how you do it, ladies, and ladies are more skilled at running in heels and long dresses. But for typical person, men especially, I imagine, if they wanted to run, if they wanted to fight or anything like that, they had to do what is called gird up the loin. And gird up the loin, pretty much they had to, because that garment was long and flowing, they pretty much had to raise that garment up. And so that was often referred to gird up the loin. In other words, it was an indication that a person was preparing for action. So even today, and we saw it continuously throughout both Old and New Testament, actually, when the phrase to gird up the loin is often referred to as a preparation for action, because when they had to move quickly, they had to fight, they had to run, something like that, they had to actually go through the process of girding their loins. In other words, we'll say pull up the hiton, that inner garment that they wore. But there's another piece of garment that they wore. Yeah, you see here's an example. It was an outer robe. It was called a himation. The himation was the outer garment that was worn outside over the inner robe. And that was usually the more expensive piece of clothing that they would wear. Some people had, very expensive ones that were made in very fancy ways. But it was very, an outer garment that was worn, especially for those who are able to afford it. And so, for example, in Matthew chapter 9, verse 21, here's where I'm going to need somebody to start helping me. Can someone read that verse for us? Read Matthew. Let's go to Matthew, just to get in the Bible and see, in a sense, how this works. Just let me get a read. I need your participation.
For she said within herself, if I may but touch his garment, I shall be whole.
You know very well that story. Jesus is called by Jairus. Thank you, Sister Thompson. Jesus is called by Jairus. His daughter is ill, and he's on his way to the house of Jairus. Here comes this woman who have been sick and have squandered everything on physicians who only made her worse. and she came into a crowd where she was forbidden to be, and she said, if I can but touch his, we read in our English text, we read his garment, but that word is actually his himathion. And the reason why we wanted to share that, because that tells us something about Jesus. That Jesus was typically just in that cultural style. So he would have had on his inner garment, but he had on this outer robe as well over his inner garment. And this lady was actually saying, if I can but touch the hem, and the Greek word we find that we have as garment was, if I can but touch the hem of his hemation, I would be made whole. Here's another interesting one. Let's get another reader for this one. Matthew 5, 40. A very, very well-known verse as well. Matthew 5, chapter 5, verse 40. Talking about clothing, what they wore.
And if any man will sue thee at the law and take away thy coat, let him have thy cloak also.
Yeah, this is a very interesting text to see how this works, and kind of give us some context, because what Jesus is saying here in this text, he's saying, and if anyone wants to sue you and take away your hiton, okay? Remember we said that hiton is an inner garment, the less expensive of the two. Now he says to them that if they want to take your hiton, the cheap one, the less expensive one, you must give him the hemation also. You would have expected that to be the reverse, but Jesus is making a point. If they want to take the cheaper garment, the everyday garment from you, you because of your commitment and because of your desire to go the second mile, even if they want the hiton, to give them the hemation. In other words, that's the cost, he says, of discipleship, to be willing to go the extra and to do the extra. So that's one place how we see those two pieces of garment being played out. You can stop me at any point for questions. So that's a little idea in terms of clothing and the home situation. We look a little bit because in the Bible we find that Jesus talks a lot about money. And what we find in the Bible is that so many different teachings that Jesus taught concerning money. And so I want to talk a little bit in the time of Jesus, what was economic life look like? What was, for example, let's look at, I think, so, okay, let's look at, how people live. The majority of the people in that time live on agriculture. It was an agrarian society. People were mainly subsistence farmers. They had little farms. In the Bible, we find that there are some landowners, perhaps looking for laborers, suggesting that they had larger farms. But the majority of the people had their little family, I guess, farms, and they were subsistence farmers. And we know that there were some landowners, for example. We find that there were laborers who came looking for work, and the master would come and take them into the field and pay them a day's wages and so forth. But for the majority of people, it was a very simple life. They were not mainly large landowners. There were some who were involved in handicraft, and this was very significant. Ellen White makes a comment. She said it was the Jewish ideal that every man, no matter how exalted in life his station, should teach his son a trade. And so it gives you the centrality of working with the hands. In other words, that no matter how exalted a person was in terms of wealth or station or status within the society, within the community, they were expected to teach their son a trade. And so what you would have find in a society like that is that most people would have been able to make a living with their hands in one way or another. And so it wasn't like you had this lifestyle and you had this job, but you couldn't do anything. You would have been frowned upon if you did not teach your child, especially your son, mainly we're talking about sons here, a trade. And so you had, for example, trades being passed down from fathers to son. No wonder when you come to the book of Acts, you find Saul of Tarsus. What is his handicraft? Anybody remember?
Tent making.
He's a tent maker. So he's able to say to the church that, listen, I never really took anything from you. Whatever I gain, I earn it with my own hands. because he had a trade. He was busy sharing the gospel and teaching the gospel. He is a very learned man, but at the same time, he had a trade as a tent maker. So when the need came, he was able to do that. How wonderful it would be for us today if we still practice that, to make sure that every young man and every young woman learn to work with their hands, learn some kind of skill or trade. So no matter where you go in life, you can be able to help. Elder Ase mentioned this morning, for example, that men's ministries gave me a gift last year. And maybe the elder detected that I didn't learn my trade. And he went to Home Depot and got me a book about do-it-yourself. So now if I read that book well, elder, I can fix the toilet, I can paint the wall, I can repair Sister angling a leak. The elder one, he wanted to be true to this. He said, Pastor, you need to go and learn a trade. And so we go to Home Depot and get you my book. My wife is here saying, well, the dishwasher need fixing, so go get them. Yeah. So that was their way of thinking. And you'll notice that Ellen White in her system of education had the same concept, that in our schools, it was not just, academic learning, but schools ought to be designed to teach our children trades. She is very firm in that, and this is where she's kind of pulling some of this from, because they had their handicraft. We know, for example, Joseph, the earthly father of Jesus, had the trade of a carpenter. They said to him, Matthew, about him in Matthew 13, verse 55, referred to Jesus as what? The carpenter's son. And so you know that Jesus would have learned the trade of carpentry because that was a trade of his earthly father as well. And you kind of wonder, knowing Jesus came into the world to seek and save the lost, was he wasting his time at carpentry? Obviously not. He lived, existed on carpentry for the early part of his life. And I don't know what he built, but can you imagine having a piece of furniture today and you're able to authenticate that it was built by Jesus? Man, I see Sister Marlene is laughing. She'd like to own that for sure. I don't know if it's for monetary value, but just at least sentimental value, to know that I have a table somewhere in the corner of my home, and it has a stamp that says "Built by Jesus." What a wonderful piece of furniture that would be. I don't know who was better at this trade, whether or not it was Elder John Henville or Jesus, but I think Elder Henville would just kind of say, I think Jesus had the upper hand. I think Elder Jesus may have been able to teach you a thing or two. He may not have been doing sheetrock or anything like that. But don't be surprised, because Peter and the other guys wanted to let him know, hey, when it comes to fishing, this is our thing. You don't really have any authority out here. Stick to carpentry. Go ahead, Elder.
I'm thinking that Jesus, knowing how we would have been, did not leave a trace of any of those tools or tables that he made, because we would have been into idol worshiping today.
Oh yeah, for sure. There's this thing called the Shroud of Turin. That is supposedly the linen that wrapped the body of Jesus. And obviously there's a lot of discussion on that historically, on whether or not they're able to authenticate that. But that thing is almost worship. That thing is worship. So imagine if you had a desk or chair, something that Jesus built. That might have been certainly an idol to worship for sure. So we do agree he didn't leave anything, because it would have distracted us from really what matters most. Thank you, Elder. Right.
So the serpent that Moses had raised on the pole later became a stumbling block to Israel.
Certainly. This is why we have a commandment not to make any graven image, because as humanity we have a tendency, we even struggle today with what Jesus looked like. Did he look like me? Did he look like you? Did he have my color, my complexion? And again, the reason for all of that is that there's something about having this image in our head, and if we have it in our hand, it certainly will become an item to worship. And I think in the wisdom of God, we don't have any, portraits and paintings and anything like that of Jesus Christ, because we would have been distracted from really what matters. So let's talk quickly about monetary system. There were at least two or perhaps three monetary system that was used back in the time of Jesus and the early days of the disciples, perhaps even the apostles. The first one was the Greek monetary system, and it was basically several different systems of coin that value a variety of amount. And the first one we can look at, and these are all you can find in the Bible, for most part of it, is what was called a drachma. Drachma was a silver coin that was equivalent to 1 day's wage. And we find that in Luke 15:8. If someone can read that for us quickly. I have a few texts that I want to see if you can help us with. Luke 15, drachma. See how those various coins are used.
Either what woman, having 10 pieces of silver, if she lose one piece, doth not light a candle and sweep the house and seek diligently till she find it.
Okay. So here's a woman and the lost coin, and this coin was a drachma, and a drachma is worth it's equivalent to a day's wage. So you're not talking about small change. For people who are really working hard for survival, this is significant value, at least to her at that time. So that's the drachma, equivalent to 1 day's wage. We find it several places along with other coins we look at. The other one was a stater. Stater sometimes referred to as a tetradrachma, simply because it's equivalent to about 4 drachmas. And so very often in Matthew, for example, just someone read that one for us, just to give us a context how we find those terms. Because what is happening when we're reading the Bible, we are just seeing, for example, coins, money, but all of these are different values. So here's one that refers to what is called a stater, a tetradrachma. Tetradrachma, just meaning 4 drachmas. Matthew 17:27.
Notwithstanding, lest we should offend them, go thou to the sea and cast an hook, and take up the fish that first cometh up. And when thou hast opened his mouth, thou shalt find a piece of money. That take and give unto them for me and thee.
Amen. So that piece of money, that term piece of money, in the Greek, the word that is used is a stater or a tetradrachma. So it tells us that the value of the money would have been equivalent to 4 days.
4 drachma, 4 days.
So you kind of get a sense, taxation a little bit when you know that you're kind of getting into the monetary system, to kind of get a feel for what was happening. So, and again, I want us to keep in mind that, days pay may not be a big deal for us, but for these people who are, really surviving, there is, significant value in that amount. And then we had what is referred to as a mina, which is equivalent to 100 drachmas. And we can find that one, for example, in Luke 19:30. Let someone read that for us. Luke chapter 19. Verse 13.
And he called his 10 servants and delivered them 10 pounds and said unto them, occupy till I come.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and you see something here with versions. And this is one of the things when I say sometimes when we get into versions, different versions are doing different things with how they translate some of these terms. But in this parable, of the minas, sometimes referred to as a parable of the minas, we're getting to see that the nobleman who went into the far country, he left his servant and delivered to them, 10 minas. This is a significant amount of money, because if 1 mina is equivalent to 100 drachmas, which would be 100 days' wages. Imagine how many, imagine how much money this is. This is a significant investment that this master would have left. 10. If one mina is equivalent to 100 drachma, you're talking about 1,000 drachma, which is 1,000 days' wages. I don't know if anyone is so willing to give up 1,000 days wages.
Like 3 years, say.
Yeah, it's pretty much about 3
Like
years, right?
close to 3 years, yeah.
Yeah, so
355 days in a year.
yes, can you imagine that kind of investment? So this is giving us some sense of scale of some of these parables, because I think one of the intent, of Jesus in many of these parables is to show you the investment into the kingdom that he makes. And I think it's probably the final Greek one I have is what is called a talenton. We're familiar with this one in Matthew 18. Someone go to Matthew 18 for us. And a talenton, I want you to see the value, because a talenton is equivalent to 6,000 drachmas, 60 minas.
And when he had begun to reckon, one was brought unto him which owed him 10,000 talents.
Yeah. No. You're seeing the scale. Of the master who invested the talents, and the significant amount of investment. Well, we know the spiritual lesson of the talent, or the talenton, is very clear. But if one talent is value equivalent to 6,000 drachma, which would be 6,000 days wages, you're talking again, about years. Okay, about years. And so the point Jesus is making in using these monetary equivalent is trying to show you the significant investment that is made by the master in your life and in my life, the investment that God makes in our life. That was a Greek, and the Roman had a similar system, because again, from what we studied last week, 2 weeks ago, we realized that there are two systems that are operating at the same time. There is the Roman system who's in power right now, but there's a Greek cultural influence that still exists. And so they're using both, in the New Testament, we see both reference to both Greek coins and Roman coins at the same time. And there are several types of Roman coins that we see mentioned. One is the lepta, or the lepton. Lepta would be plural, which was a small copper coin that was used, and we find that in Matthew 12:42. If someone can read that for us very quickly, just to keep us in the word, get the context.
And there came a certain poor widow, and she threw in 2 mites, which make a farthing.
Mm-hmm. You know the story, very powerful indication of what we contribute into the kingdom, and we are told that the widow came and she threw in her 2 lepter, okay, her 2 lepters, which is very, very, very insignificant. It's less than what we will call, because the text interpret and say it's equivalent to a farthing. That is a term that came from King James. That word is actually, this word is called a quadrant or quadrantis, which is interpreted by King James as a farthing, just coming out of that British currency system. So a quadrant is, if you divide a penny in 4, a penny, okay. If you divide a penny in 4, that's really what a lepton is, quadrant. So I don't know how it was in your country, but I remember years ago when I was a boy growing up, we had a penny, and then you had what we call it was a half penny. Because we had the British system, and so we had a penny and then a half penny. We call it a halfpenny, halfpenny. We used to call it. I don't think they have it now. They kind of got away with. Anybody remember that in their country they had that as well? Half a penny.
We had it too.
You call it a halfpenny, and I didn't know that until I was doing this, and I looked it up, because we used just a penny or halfpenny, and I realized that the word, what we said halfpenny, is actually what the British did to shorten half penny. They call it a halfpenny, and so we shortened that even further from saying a halfpenny to a halfpenny. So that's what that was. It was less than a penny. So it tells you how insignificant this amount in terms of currency value was. But Jesus went back and he says, that may seem on the economic scale insignificant, but in the banks of heaven, she made the greatest investment. And this is what Jesus was trying to say, between her putting in the lepter, that was just, the quadrantis. And there was another coin, the Assyrian, that we see, once or twice in the New Testament, was his 4 quadrantis. So these are all the coin system that we see. And then we see, this other Roman coin we see quite often is the denarius, or the denarii, which is equal to a drachma, the Greek coin. So these are some of the monetary system that we see. And it helps us to see that there are two economies that are surviving side by side within this Jewish environment. But was there a Jewish coin? Anyone think? Anyone remember? Was there a Jewish coin? We talk about the Greek coins and the Roman coins that we see all over the scriptures. What about Jewish coin? Anybody can think?
Silver that Jesus was sold for 30 pieces.
Okay, 30 pieces of silver. Okay.
So what was that Jewish?
Yeah, because here's what happens. The Jewish had a currency as well. The Jews had a currency. It was usually not used for ordinary commerce. It was what they refer to as a shekel, which was a temple currency. So the shekel was significant to the Jews because they use it within the temple system, within their religious system. Now, this would help us to understand why one of the reasons why they need money changes. When they came, you remember, they came to worship, and they needed to exchange money. In Matthew 21, they needed to exchange money, and one of the reasons why they exchanged money is because to conduct business in the temple, the business of sacrifice and worship, you needed to do exchange only with the temple shekel. And so if you had drachmas, or you had quadrantis, or you had denarii, whatever Greek or Roman coins you had, when you came to the temple, you needed to exchange that for the temple shekel. And so this is one of the reasons why Jesus came in, and the money changes are there. Remember, the Bible said that there are 2 types of people: those who are selling doves and animals to sacrifice, but there are also the money changers, the money exchanges. And so this is a reason why the money exchanges are there, because anything having to do with the temple, you had to be able to use the shekel, or the Jewish temple currency. All right. And any other question before we move on to religious life?
What about the Jira?
That was mainly an Old Testament coin. Because we're talking about life and teaching of Jesus. We're talking about those that were in operation. There were certain systems of exchange as well in Old Testament. And the Gera, I'm not sure that was a New Testament coin. If I remember, if that served me correctly, I think that may have been an exchange system within the Old Testament economy, because there they had systems of exchange as well. But again, in the time of Jesus, remember, there are 2 cultures and 2 systems that are dominant. It is a Roman system, and as the Romans come in, they are making exchange in their coins. But the Greek system is still, working side by side. And the main reason for that, because when Rome came in, as we said the last time, remember, Rome did not come in and just usurp everything that was Hellenistic. Because Hellenistic has made such an inroad in not just in Palestine area, but in the entire world, that it makes sense that merchants coming from various places will be still making trade using Greek currency. And so because of that, they had that. Okay.
So the silvers were of secular. The 30 pieces of silver, were they Jewish, and was it secular?
Yeah, my thinking, and I didn't look that up specifically, so I'm not 100% sure. But because it's exchanged within a temple system, more than likely it is a shekel. Remember that Judas went, to the high priest and exchanged for this amount. It may have been shekels. I'm not 100% sure, but I'm leaning towards that. Perhaps I can check that out, just to verify, but I'm not sure exactly. Yeah. So sometimes you're able to look at the text and tell, because when the text is translated in the Greek, if you go back to the Greek, it will say specifically what it was. For example, in the case of the widow's mite, if you go to the text, it's going to say, lepta and quadrantis. So what is used. But if it's a pieces of silver, I am not 100% sure, but I can check that out for you.
Pastor, what about the fish, the money that was in the fish mouth that Peter went and fished up?
For the taxes.
Yes.
Yeah, I think we looked at that a little bit back. You know, when he's paying the tax, let me see if I can go back to that one.
To the Romans, right?
The Romans. He's paying the tax to the Romans, and he's using a stater.
Okay.
He's using a stater tetradrachma, which is one is the text a piece of money. Okay, when we read most of our translation, but we know from the original that it's referring to a stater, what is called a tetradrachma, is a coin. So it'd be like 4 days' wages, for example. Which is interesting. It was enough to pay not only for Jesus but also for the disciples.
Yeah.
You know, so I don't know if they had a good taxation system going. Only 4 days. I think now taxes cost us more than 4 days. You would have to work much more than 4 days to pay your taxes. Am I correct? Somebody?
It did work $750.
That's only
Yeah.
the
And the question would be, because when you say a day's wages, you can estimate what it is, but all of us a day's wages may be different depending on what kind of work we're doing, but this may be an average of what people made. And again, most of the time you see those things in terms of a day's wages and so forth. It's referring to the common person, and it's not going to go to the wealthiest. It's often referring to what the common person makes. So $750 is an anomaly, to say the least. The last time I checked Elevation, I pay nowhere close to $750. If you can help me understand better the tax laws, and so I can help myself out a little bit. Some people have mastered those things and figure it out. So perhaps you can help me so I can pay $750 too. After Sabbath, you can hold a class if you can help us figure that out. Let's talk about religious life quickly. Because again, we said, central to the existence of Judaism and the people of God and the Jewish economy is religious life. Life revolve around religious issues. And so, the first thing that I want us to keep in mind when, the kind of people that live in that time, the average everyday person was referred to what they call the people of the land. The people of the land, and haaretz, we'll call it. Am meaning people, and haaretz, which really mean the land. And aretz mean the land. So really they refer to as am haaretz, the people of the land. That was a common person. It's kind of interesting that as I was reading this week, most commentators are saying the time of Jesus, to be called the person of the land or the people of the land was a kind of derogatory term. But initially, the people of the land was not intended to be derogatory. The people of the land just meant, actually at one point referred to the people of God. But by the time you got down to this time, because there's such a hierarchy being developed and there's such an elite citizenry developing, the common man that is referred to as the people of the land is kind of looked down on by most of the elite. But the ordinary everyday citizen of the people at the time of Jesus would have been called the people of the land. And it's interesting when you read the scriptures, you notice that the people who are the most receptive to Jesus and to his teaching are who? The common people. It is the common people that follow him in Job. It's the common people that is fed by the miracle of the loaf and the fish. It is a common people that are coming to him to be healed. And so very often it is a common people that responds to the teachings of Jesus. And I think we can say the same is so today. Why do you think that is so? And any thoughts on that? That even then, it seems to be the common people, the masses, if you will, that responds to the gospel and are sensitive and open to receive the teachings of Jesus. Any reason, any ideas?
If they have their money, they can get the best of healthcare and best of teachers and whatever. So for the most part, most of them didn't need of anything.
Yeah. Yeah, money tend to give us a feeling that we really don't need anything, right? We can just buy, whatever we are. There is a curse, to really have an abundance. And this was, in fact, one of the warnings that God gave to his people when they came into the land, that they are going to become so wealthy and they're going to be so successful that the temptation is going to be that, guess what? We don't need God. We don't need him. That's why you can, understand in Proverbs chapter 30, I think it is, that Agar prayed, God, give me neither poverty nor wealth. If you give me wealth, I may forget, I may curse God. I may forget God if I'm wealthy. But he said, if you give me poverty, then I may steal. And so he said, God, give me neither poverty nor wealth. Just keep me somewhere where I'm comfortable, supply my daily bread, as it were. And he wanted that middle ground because he realized that there was a danger to both. And so you had the common people, but then you also had, very often when we read the Bible, we see, the scribes. And so who were the scribes? The scribes were really the lawyers. And we find that in Luke chapter 10, for example, tells us, that there's a lawyer that came to Jesus to ask him a question. Now, that lawyer is not a lawyer in the sense of, one of our attorneys or advocates or legal people today. This is a lawyer in the sense that, someone who makes legal decision. They were like the Supreme Court of the day, but they were legal in the sense of the religious institution. They were the one who went to the law of God, and they were the one who tried to interpret how the application of the law of God. So they were lawyers in that sense. And very often when there were disputes, they went to the scribes to help them to sort it out. And the scribes are, very well held in high esteem. They were, kind of a elite, a hierarchy, very well respected at the time of Jesus. We look at them a little later, but you see how they continue to work in and out of the system with Jesus. Many of the scribes were actually Pharisees. They were leaders of the Pharisees. I think a friend of mine said it a couple of years ago that, that every scribe was a Pharisee, but not every Pharisee was a scribe. That's one way of looking at it, because the scribe were kind of leaders among the Pharisees with a special responsibility for interpreting, not just writing, but interpreted the laws. Just quickly, you may come across this something not necessarily in the reading of the biblical text, but sometimes in commentaries. There were two very well-known schools of scribe that existed at the time of Jesus. One was the school of Shammai, one was the school of Hillel. And the reason why I'm sharing these with you, because much of the interpretations that we find in the Bible going on as Jesus is there, they're coming from these two main schools. The school of Shammai, it was very conservative in the interpretation of the law. And they were very anti-Roman, okay? They hated the Roman. They didn't want anything. They wanted to get rid of the Romans. And you see some of this playing out even among the disciples. The school of Hillel, they had a very liberal interpretation. They welcome Hellenism. They welcome Rome. They figure if we can learn to put Judaism and Hellenism together, we'll be okay. So you had these two schools, even at the time of Christ, in conflict with each other very often. And we'll see how some of this play out in Christ and the work of the disciples. Someone read Matthew 7, 28 and 29 for me. Matthew 7, 28, 29.
And it came to pass when Jesus had ended these saying, the people were astonished at his doctrine, for he taught them as one having authority and not as the scribes.
I wanted to read this because, again, at the time of Jesus, the scribes are very well respected. They're held in high esteem. But when they came and they heard the teachings of Jesus, this was the report that they took back. They say when they listened to Jesus, he spoke with a certain authority. Now remember, the scribes also had authority, and what they were doing, they were distinguishing between the authority of Jesus and the authority of scribe. And so when they say he spoke as one having authority, but his authority was not one like that of a scribe. In other words, they recognized that he spoke with a heavenly authority. The scribes perhaps had a positional authority because of their position among the Pharisees. But when they listened to Jesus, this ordinary teacher, okay, he's not a scribe, he's not a Pharisee, he's not in the religious elite, but when he spoke, what a powerful authority he had. And even the people who heard him and listened to him were able to contrast and compare his authority with those of the religious elite of his time. Yeah. Just want to touch basically quickly on the synagogue. You notice that the focal point at the time of Jesus in terms of religious and everyday community life was a synagogue. The synagogue, sometimes we are tempted to see the synagogue simply as a church, but understand that for the Jews and Judaism, the synagogue is more than our church today. The synagogue is a center of everything. Everything happened at the synagogue. The synagogue, is really where community life happens. It's a place of worship, similar to how we go to a central place to worship. Worship happens at the synagogue. We read in Luke chapter 4, for example, that he came to Nazareth, where he had been brought up, and as his custom was, on the Sabbath day, he went where?
In the synagogue.
To the synagogue. That was the habit of Jesus. Sabbath would find Jesus at some point of the day, not all day like us for sure. We know that. We see him walking on the Sabbath, even walking through cornfields and breaking corn. So Sabbath was not spent. We see him outside, performing miracle and teaching. But we know that a portion of his Sabbath was spent certainly in the synagogue. Not only Sabbath, but synagogue was an everyday part of life. The synagogue was also schoolhouse. It was where the children went to learn. It was where education happened in their life. It was a multi-purpose hall, if you will. And I was looking at this, and I thought about what we call church and what we do church. And I think this is still a powerful model in every community. That the place where we call church and the structure and the facility that we have within a community, I think that it ought to be all these things and more. It should not just be a place that we go once a week for religious instruction and worship, but how powerful our buildings would be in the center of communities when the building is all these things and more. The center of life. If we can say, 265 Belmont Parkway is a center of life in the village of Hempstead. It's a place where people go when they want to be served, when they want to receive care, whether or not it's education, religious, just a multi-purpose environment for serving the community. And that's kind of what the synagogue was. The other thing about the synagogue, the question was, how do you start a synagogue? Because we see this played out in the Bible very often. The rule was very simple. In order to start a new synagogue, you needed 10 families. And the male of those 10 families would be called the archierus, they call them, are the rulers of the synagogue. So in Mark chapter 5, for example, when you read, about the ruler of the synagogue, you get a sense that he was one who perhaps had either started a synagogue. If the synagogue existed before he started it, he was elected as one of the 10 rulers of the synagogue. And so very often we come across that sometimes. Jairus, for example, we know was a ruler of the synagogue, so he was involved. The distinction between the synagogue I want to make is that there was no sacrifice at the synagogue because the temple was not, the synagogue did not serve or replace the temple, so there were no animal sacrifice in that sense at the synagogue because it was different, certainly from the temple worship. And I think we kind of coming down as we talk a little bit more about not only the scribe, but there were several other sects of Judaism that you see over the Bible, and I just want to go over at least maybe a few, maybe three or four of them quickly with you. Go ahead, Elder.
I just want to say I've gone into one of the synagogues in Forest Hills a few times, and I was surprised to note, during the worship section,
yes,
that there's a railed section where you have the ladies sit, and they're not permitted to go where the men occupy. The men occupy the vast majority.
Sure.
But there's that railed section where just ladies
yeah
ladies allowed to go.
And you know, they had that with when the temple was built as well. There was that system of separation, and that was a cultural thing for them for several reasons. But you remember in the temple, when you look at the temple, what we call Herod's temple, for example, there were several courts in the temple. So if you're entering the temple, the first court you would enter is what they call the courts of the Gentiles, the Goyims. Those were the outsiders. They were not part of Judaism. So that's where they can go. For example, when Andrew came and said, you know, there are some Greeks. Remember, he was at the temple and he came and he said, there are some Greeks who want to see Jesus. And he came to report that those Greeks would have been allowed only in what is called the courts of the Gentiles. When you leave the court of the Gentiles, you'll get to what they call, ladies, the court of the women. Okay. And these courts are not just, you know, separation for separation's sake. In the mind of the Jewish thinkers, these represented various levels of holiness. Okay, so you had the Gentiles who are obviously heathens and pagans, you know, but at least they can approach and remain in the courts of the Gentile because of the level of holiness. Then above that would have been the court of the women. You know, so sisters, you're doing better than the Gentiles, the heathens and the pagans. But you can't go any further. And then they had what they call the court of Israel, which is, you know, the ordinary typical man would have been able to be in that court. The ordinary Jewish male would have been in that, not the women, but the male. And if the young boy, if he was past the age of 12 and bar mitzvah, then he could have gone there with his father. If not, he stayed with the mother in the court of the women. So you kind of find that, you know, when Jesus went to the temple at the age of 12, you kind of see some of that being played out as well. And then finally, they had the court of the priests. This was for the religious elite, the Pharisees and the scribes and so forth. Well, you know, so it's built on the various levels of what they would consider to be holiness. And so even sometimes today, you still find that in various religions. You find that in Islam as well. If you've ever gone to, you know, a Muslim mosque, you find the same system of separation. You know, a friend of mine who's Muslim, you know, so part of that is not so much a, you know, religious separation, but because in terms of how they worship, when they kneel and they bow to pray, you know, they form a line and they're not sitting in pews like we are. You know, so you know, you don't want a situation where the man is behind the woman and the women are behind the man and so forth, and so they just separate them, you know, for that reason. But you know, we still find that today within those religious systems. Yeah. Okay. So we had the Pharisees, and the Pharisees, again, we touched on them a little bit the last time. We talked about the fact that the Pharisees were referred to as, literally mean the separated ones. They are descendants of what we talked about the last time, the Hasidim. You remember the Hasidim were the one who, the Maccabees, who revolted against Antiochus Epiphanes, you know, stopping them with a Maccabean rebellion from coming into the temple and sacrificing various things. And so the Pharisees, you know, some years later claimed to be descended from these Hasidim and consider themselves to be the separated ones. They had a very rigid adherence to the law. In other words, again, and you understand culturally where they came from and religiously where they came from. They're zealous for the law. And so even when Jesus came and appeared to them, suggesting some things that they are not used to, they had issues with him. They're very rigid, but I want you to keep in mind that sometimes we have a tendency when we read Pharisee and we think about Pharisee, and we even call today some people Pharisees in a way to insult them. You know, today in our time, if someone called you a Pharisee, usually it's not a good thing. Am I correct? You know, if someone say, you know, he's such a Pharisee, you know, it's almost as if, you know, they're calling you a hypocrite. And why the Pharisees were hypocritical very often in their interaction with Jesus. Remember that during their time, the Pharisees are the spiritual guide. These are people who are held to very high esteem. And so if every time you read Pharisee, you're tempted to replace that with a hypocrite, you may not have it altogether correct, because again, they were hypocritical in a lot of ways. But again, they were the ones, fighting to hold the faithfulness to the word of God together, because of the coming down from the Hasidim. They wanted to protect the word of God. And so they had a zeal for the law. And as a result of that, what we find with them is that, we find this in Matthew 23, verse 23, that they're so zealous for the law that they major in minors. They want to be able to break down the minutest detail of the law. And so we find them in Matthew 23, counting the smallest possible seed in order to be faithful in their tithes. And so, they're very dedicated and committed leaders, religious leaders. We find them in various controversies with the scribes, the Sadducees. There are certain things that we know concerning some of their beliefs. We know that they had a belief in angels and spirit, immortality, and they believe in the resurrection. These are some of the things that we see in the biblical text concerning some of their beliefs. They had a deep concept of holiness, and they had the emphasis on religious purity was always there. And so you kind of get a sense of the reason why. They're coming mainly from the school of Shammai, which was very conservative. The school of Hillel, from which we find the Sadducees a little more liberal, but these are people who are just really zealous for the law. Some of the famous Pharisees, we don't have time to go into each of the texts, but some of the famous Pharisees that you find across the biblical pages, Nicodemus, for example, John chapter 3. You find Nicodemus in John chapter 3. He is a leader, ruler of the Pharisees. Jesus pulled him up, concerning how are you a teacher of the law, and you don't know these things. Joseph of Arimathea, he went and gave the burial place for our Lord and Savior, is also a Pharisee. We have a Pharisee, Simon, Pharisee, and we have another in John chapter 12. We have another unnamed Pharisee. So we have several Pharisees who are interacting with Jesus. And so I'm saying this to say not all Pharisees are hypocrites. They're Pharisee. And in fact, who's the most known Pharisee in Scripture? Anybody want to take a guess?
Paul.
Paul. Paul will let you know, that he is indeed, Acts, in the book of Acts, Paul will tell you that he's a Pharisee. He's a proud Pharisee. He has no problem, telling you he's a Pharisee, because even after he is, connected with Christ and he is preaching Christ, he still holds up the fact that he is this Pharisee, Pharisee. Touching the law, he says, I'm what? Blameless. In other words, not all Pharisees are bad. And I get a sense that sometimes when we think Pharisees, automatically we think, man, Pharisees are bad. But again, you kind of understand in one sense why they are so zealous to protect the law, because of their cultural heritage coming down from the Hasidim, why they want to be these protectors of the law. And then we have the Sadducees. You remember the Sadducees? The Sadducees, they're different from the Pharisee in the sense that they are really, where the Pharisees are a religious group, zealous for the things of God and the law. The Sadducees really are a political elite. They are the wealthy, the wealthy elite. They are the aristocracy at the time of Jesus. They control the temple, not from a religious point, but they control the temple in terms of, all the political, economic things happening at the temple, the political life, the political interests, rather than the religious interests of the temple. That's the Sadducees. They are liberal, as I said, in their theology. They're not, and their lifestyle, they are open, because their idea is if we can merge Judaism, Hellenism, and Roman culture, I think we get it all. And so why stick to one thing? Why not open up and let anything in? That's pretty much the Sadducees. One of the things in terms of their teachings that we know is that they deny the existence of angels and spirits. And you see that put them right away in conflict with the conservative Pharisees. They also deny, did not believe in the resurrection, the afterlife. And so because of that, they are sometimes in conflict, with the Pharisees. Another thing I discovered is that they accepted the first 5 books of the scriptures, and they rejected anything else. Okay, whereas the Pharisees, they accepted, not just of the 5 books of Torah, the books of Moses, but the writings and the prophets, they accepted as well. And then we find that they disappeared. This was interesting that they disappeared as a political party in AD 70. Anyone can think about what is significant, why they might have disappeared in AD 70?
Because of the destruction of the city.
The destruction of the city, because they are, you can become a Pharisee, but you can't just become a Sadducee because you're close religious elite. And so when the temple and the city is destroyed, guess what happened when the Sadducees died? They all, disappear. It's the end of them. But the Pharisees are a little different because you can go and start up again. But because you're so close politically, we see that they come to an end as a political system when the city is destroyed. And the other 2 that I share with you quickly, and then I open up for questions, that we see sometimes in the Bible are the Essenes. The Essenes are also descendant of the Hasidim. Usually they live in desert community. They separate themselves from culture. One of the things that we learn about them, and we learn this mainly from the Qumran community. Remember in 1947, the discovery of the Dead Sea Scroll that we find, for example, the Isaiah scroll and some of the ancient scrolls of the Old Testament. We also find some of their writings. And one of the things that we find was discovered in some of their writings is that when they live in these communities, these Essene communities, they had really were a commune. They held everything in common. And you see this kind of playing out even in the apostles, in the life of the new church, where they're selling what they have, and they're moving towards, they're willing, I should say, towards even holding property and various things in common. But this was a practice of the Essenes in these community. But they also deny, like the Sadducees, the resurrection of the body. So in terms of what they believe, these are some of the things that we discovered. There are some who believe that perhaps John the Baptist was an Essene. It seemed very unlikely when you kind of look, and we don't have time to go into all of that, but when you look at some of the beliefs held by many of the Essenes, though John may have come in contact with them and John separated himself, he was not necessarily living out there in an Essene community. And so, some people do believe that because of some of his culture, some of his lifestyle habits, that he may have been one, but it seemed very unlikely when you put everything else together. And so finally, we have the Zealots. The Zealots were really an interesting group in the sense that they were followers of the school of Shammai, which means that they were very conservative. In fact, they were even worse than the Pharisees. They were ultra conservative. They hated the Romans. Okay, the worst thing for zealot to be walking the streets of Jerusalem and see was a Roman. Their blood would boil. And so they had a zeal, for the things of God as well, but to the point that they would take it by any means necessary. Luke 6:15, we discover that even one of the disciples named Simon is referred to as a zealot. We find him in Acts 1:13 as well. Simon, one of the 12, one of the disciples, one of the 12, is referred to as Simon the Zealot. And I want you to think about that for a while, because one of the things that we know about the Zealots is that they were not just, a movement. They actually emerged as a nationalistic Jewish party in 6 AD. And so they were serious. But the Zealots were so serious that they were often referred to as the dagger men, the Sakari men, because a Sakari was a small dagger that they were able to conceal within their himathion. Remember that outer coat? They would actually walk with that dagger because they were so zealous for nationalistic Israel that they would conceal this dagger, this Sakari sword, in their garment. And it was not unheard of that a zealot would be walking the street and see a group of Romans pull out his dagger, stab a few of them and keep on walking. This is how serious these zealots were. But what is powerful as we wrap this up and we think about this cultural thing, and we think about the clothes they wear and the house they live, and the various religious sects and religious groups that we find. I think what is powerful out of this study tonight is that when Jesus called together the 12, one of them that he called is an ex-zealot, one of these dagger men, one of these Sakari men. But not only does he have a zealot in the group, because what the zealots hated more than a Roman was a tax collector. Can you imagine why? Because tax collectors were often Jews working for the Roman, worse than the Roman, because Rome would come in and Rome would say, for this village, this is the amount of tax that I want. Make sure I get it, and anything else you get, that's on you. And so they would really be harsh and hard on the people, to make sure Rome got what she wanted, and then off of that, they would go and they'll take additional for themselves. And so the tax collectors were hated. But when Jesus called the 12, the grace of God is so powerful that in the midst of the 12, you have a dagger man, a zealot, Simon, but you also have at the same time Matthew, a tax collector, sworn enemies. But when Jesus called, it is only Jesus who can call an ex-assassin and an ex-tax collector and have two bitter enemies working together to spread the good news of Jesus Christ. I can't help wondering what it might have been like for Matthew sometimes. Can you imagine with me? Matthew, they're walking in a crowd, Ella John.
Watching his back.
And he looks behind him and he sees Simon the zealot pushing his hand in his hamarthion. And him being an ex-tax collector and know what is usually in the coat, in the hamarthion of a zealot.
Pastor.
I can see Matthew walking a little faster, getting a little closer to Jesus. I can see Matthew saying, I stay on the right hand of Jesus. So long as Simon is on the left, I want to stay on the right. But in time, it is only the grace of God who can make people who are such bitter enemies and bring them together for common purpose. What a God we serve. Sister Fuller.
Pastor, Simon was Peter, right?
No, there are two different Simons. There's Simon Peter, okay, the brother of Andrew, okay, but there's also Simon, sometimes referred to as Simon the Zealot, or even Simon the Canaanite.
So was he the one who cut the man's ears off?
No, that would have been Simon Peter.
So it was Simon Peter that have a little bit of zealous in him.
Well, yes. I think Simon Peter had a little bit of everything in him. We don't know that he was a zealot. He's a fisherman, and we know this distinguished from Simon the Zealot. And you can understand why they're referred to as Simon Peter and Simon the Zealot, because you have two Simons in the group, and you want to make sure that you don't mix them up. But Simon Peter was the fisherman, the brother of Andrew from Bethsaida, we are told, and we know he had a wife. Because we understand his mother-in-law became sick of a fever and Jesus healed her. But again, Simon the Zealot was this ex-Sakari man. And I can't help Sister Anglin to know that even when he was with Jesus, I suspect that he still had that Sakari for a while. Because Simon Peter, in the Garden of Gethsemane, Jesus had to say, Simon, put it away. Put it away. So Simon Peter had one. I'm sure Sister Marlene, that the Zealot had one as well. But the time, under the influence of God, what these men can become. And I say all of this to help us to think that we should never think that anyone is too far away from God to be used in a powerful way by God. Because when God can turn ex-assassin and ex-tax collectors and ex-prostitutes, and when you think about Jesus, as you continue to read the Bible, you'll notice that these are the kind of people that he have around him. So when we talk about the Pharisees, for example, why are the Pharisees having such a hard time with this new rabbi? Because of the people that he surrounded himself with. This guy claimed to be a teacher. He didn't go to the school of the rabbis, John. He didn't have all the religious things that the teach authority that they had. And to make matters worse, he's hanging out with zealots, and he's hanging out with prostitutes, and he's hanging out with tax collectors. He's hanging out with drunkards. Luke chapter 15. That these guys say, there is no way that this guy can be a religious teacher. There's no way that he can be a teacher that comes from God. So no wonder when they went and they said, wait a minute, he's not one of us, but yet he speaks with an authority. And it's not like our authority. There's something about him. And so I can understand the Pharisees, why they had such a hard time with him. But again, there were those Pharisees who were open enough that when they heard him and they listened to him like Nicodemus, guess what? They say, you got to be the real deal.
Mm-hmm.
Got to be the real deal.
Pastor, is it safe to say he didn't believe?
Go ahead.
Is it safe to say that Jesus did not believe in the caste or class system?
In one sense, one of the things you notice about Jesus is that he operated within that system, okay? But yet he was not afraid to see people within the system. You understand what I'm saying? In other words, the system was there, and he respected to some degree. We saw that with, for the Roman system, for example, and the tax, given to Caesar that which is due unto Caesar. But Jesus is not seeing class, a caste. He's seeing what? People. Okay. He's not seeing, that he's not grouping all the women in one category and say, listen, what? You got to stay within the code of the women, because their women were not supposed to ever be sitting at the feet of a rabbi. This was a problem with Mary and her alabaster box. Only men sat at the feet of the rabbi. And so here is this woman, and she's not just a woman. First of all, she's a woman of ill repute, but yet she comes in and she's carrying out this act. It is said that Jewish men, more so then, perhaps still so today, when they walk in public, guess what? The Jewish man did not walk in public with his wife. If the wife was there, she walked behind him, just because there was that separation, of sex. And so imagine this Jesus, how scandalous that is, to allow this woman and to say nothing about him. It boils the blood of all these Pharisees. And so they couldn't take that, but I would say he worked within the system. He's not, he doesn't come in like the Terminator to trample everything that existed. Why you think Jesus would have worked like that? Just come in and say, out with everything one time. What do you think would have happened if he took that approach?
They would immediately kill him.
Yeah. The purpose of what he came would not have been solved. And it's not that he condoned certain things that were wrong within the system, but again, he's looking at people, and with every opportunity he's teaching, and he's bringing individual closer to him. You keep in mind that even the disciples that are following Jesus, they are still seeing the Gentiles, the Samaritans, as dogs. They're walking with Jesus, and Jesus didn't give them, first lesson you got to understand is that Samaritans are not dogs. So when the Syrophoenician woman comes to him, and the disciples are seeing her as a dog, and she said, Master, even the dogs, the puppies, eat at the master's table. Jesus is using all of that, to play and to push the envelope on the disciples a little bit, and to say, really stop a minute and don't see just a Gentile woman, a Syrophoenician woman. I want you to see a mother who's in distress. And can your heart move to a mother in distress? That is the same thing to which we are called today. Can we see people, Can we see people? I saw somebody put yesterday when the news came out that our president had the coronavirus. I see some very, what people believe to be funny, but some comments, okay, that you say, wait a minute, you may not like the president, but this is a person who has the coronavirus like any other person that is in need of healing and in need of prayer like any other person. And so this is what Jesus saw. He saw people within the system, and he's able to see in them, what the ordinary person cannot see.
Pastor,
go ahead, Ella.
Can the Zionists of today be compared with the Sadducees of yesterday?
To some degree, because what you'll find with many of the religious sects today in Judaism, it is the same family trees that exist, and so what you find in some of these groups is that they have inherited very much some of these some of these traits, but just like the Essenes, the Sadducees as a political system, a political party, also vanished around 70 AD, because 70 AD was not just the destruction of the temple by Titus. It was really a crush, and everything that was Judaism at the time. And so many of these did not survive, beyond that. But what survived are some remnants of some of their beliefs and some of their teaching. So you'll find that many of these groups are pulling from some of these very things. In fact, there's in Brooklyn, some of the areas within the city here, some Hasidic communities. And part of what they are still carrying is some of this Hasidim tradition. Even way before the Pharisees, they're still holding on to some of this zeal that the Nicodeans had, and some of the Hasidims had even way back then. It's a religious family tree that goes way back. And so you'll find some remnant of it even now. Even for us as Seventh-day Adventists, we still hold on to some truths and some zeal for the things of God, very much like some of these groups. Obviously, we hope by the grace of God, we have grown under the grace of God, and we have we have spent enough time with Christ to really see the distinction between just as law for the sake of the law, but understand that the grace of God operates in the heart of men, enabling us to be faithful to the law of God. But we are holding on to some of this tradition as well, even as the people of God today.
So, Pastor, I think that that is the focal point of the whole lesson. Some lessons to be learned here really is that we can find ourselves in the Pharisees, that even to us today, we probably hold so fast to the letter of the law and be so conservative in our approach that we forget the spirit of the law, and prevents us pretty much from becoming more accepting of people who are not like us. And I believe that the Jewish peoples get a really a bad rap here, because the whole platform on which we learn about Jesus and so on is the Jewish communities put under a microscope. And so the women walking behind the man in Jewish community, that is not unique to the Jews. We see that in a lot of Arabic countries. We see that in a lot of Caribbean countries, where women is thought to be subservient in some sense. And even today, women are still fighting for rights, even in our so-called enlightened society. And one of the things that always worried me a lot is that we could sometimes hardly get through a sermon without actually coming across as anti-Semitic sometimes. I am reluctant to bring my Jewish friends to church because I shouldn't say almost every, but too often I hear sermons where Jews are put down, and we use the word, well, the Jews reject Jesus, the Jews this, the Jews that and so when a Jewish person hears that, they see it as and feel it as anti-Semitic, and therefore their feelings at that point is that, well, this is not for me. I'm in the wrong place. And so I like your focus today on breaking down and differentiating the different types of authorities in the Jewish community, Sadducees, the Pharisees, and the roles that each one have played. And perhaps the rejection of Jesus may not necessarily be that all Jews rejected Jesus. Some of Jesus's best friends and disciples were Jews that accepted it wholeheartedly. But the way we speak sometimes, it appears that, well, the Jews are just this horrible group when it comes to Jesus, and therefore there is not an area of tolerance or acceptance to bring them into the fold.
Yeah, and I really do appreciate that. You know, there's always a danger when you paint any group of people with a broad stroke. You know, the Bible tells us, by the way, that many of the scribes and many of the Pharisees, many of the priests became believers. And so, you know, we see Nicodemus and we see Joseph of Arimathea, but we learn in the book of Acts that many of them actually became believers. There was a period of time when the church was a Jewish church, you know, and so when we say, when we paint a broad stroke and we say the Jews or we say the Pharisees, we are not doing justice, because again, you know, the early church is a Jewish church. The early believers are all Jews, and we see that in Galatians. We see that you know where there is this struggle, you know, of bridging Judaism and this new Christian faith, and they're growing. There are some growing pains. We even see it between you know, some of the apostles. We see, you know, the arguments between even Paul and Peter, you know, who are leaders, because they're struggling to understand this new Christian religion that they have been made a part of. And so, you know, in their mind, it's not necessarily at some point two different things. It's understanding Judaism within the context of what Christ has opened to them. The same is true for us today, especially as Seventh-day Adventists. You know, we don't see ourselves as, you know, people who believe only in the New Testament. We believe that all scriptures given by the inspiration of God. We understand the heritage that we have is both Old and New Testament. There are things that we experience from God, from the revelation of God, that came in the New Testament, that came in the Old Testament. And so it's part and parcel of the same thing. And so I do agree with you that we have to be careful whenever we paint any people with this broad stroke, because not everyone will fit, you know, our thinking and our understanding. And the thing to me, as you said, even with the Pharisees, because, you know, I am guilty of really beating up the Pharisees. You know, it makes me feel good to beat up a Pharisee when I read my Bible. Sometimes, I don't know if I'm the only one. Beating up a Pharisee sometimes make me feel better. Right? But really and truly, you have to understand the thinking and the mindset of the Pharisee. The Pharisee, coming from the Hasidim, you know, wanted to protect, you know, the institution of Judaism. They wanted to remain untainted from the attack of Antiochus Epiphanes, and they fought for this and won this. And they say, we're going to protect it with everything. And so they became so concerned about the law that they started coming up with a detailed principle for every aspect you can imagine about the law, when the principles then became more important than the law itself, and they lost it. And Jesus came in that context to say to them, wait a minute, you say this, but here's what I am saying. You know, so he's able to show them now, this is the way that we are to go. And I hope that as we grow in faith, that should be the same direction that we grow as well as believers. Any further question or comment as we close? Ella John?
The group called the Herodians. What was the primary function in the society at the time?
Herodians.
Yeah.
I didn't study the Herodians too much, but from our last study, when we talk about the Hashmoneans, some of them came along from the Hashmoneans, and the Herodians were not necessarily a separate sect. like how we had the Pharisees and the Sadducees. I don't think the Herodians were necessarily a separate sect, because what happens, for example, is similar to the scribes. Keep in mind that the scribes, you can have a scribe, as I said before, all scribes are Pharisees, but not necessarily all Pharisees are scribes. And so you had the Herodians at the same time, with this, also very rigid religiously, operating at the same time. But I think, if my understanding is correct of them, they cross over, several of these categories as well. And so they are not necessarily functioning separately within this context, but they are blending themselves within some of these other religious sects at the same time as we are looking at the major ones, if my understanding on the Herodians is correct.
Anything to do with Herod?
Yeah. Well, the last time we talked about Herod, because there's several Herods. Remember, we talked about several Herods.
Yes.
There's Herod Antipas, there's Herod the Great. And we get a sense that, from the Hashmoneans, Herod is trying to set up his sons. And so you had this, what they call tetrarchy, the tetrarchy of Philip, the tetrarchy of Herod, that existed, in the time of Jesus, because Herod is trying to set up, all these sons to cover various, what the Romans call tetrarchs. In other words, when the Romans came into a community, normally their way is to divide a community in four, which we get the word tetrarch, to rule over a quarter. And so they're setting up these various, segment of government. And so what we find with Herod is that he tried his best to set up his sons into some of these different tetrarchies to rule. So they're connected to Herod in that sense that
yes,
coming down from Herod, Herod coming down from Herod. But I don't, when you think about Herod, because there are several Herods and there are several things that are happening, historically and culturally, you're finding that, there's a political aspect of it, but you're finding also that there's some religious cultural aspect of it. And the reason for that, as I said before, is that we separate politics and religion. But remember that these people living in a time when there's not so much as separated from the profane and the sacred. Everything is kind of meshed together, because there's no separate life apart from religious life. And so it's not a pure political thing. So that's why when you find the Sadducees, for example, they're concerned with the politics of the temple, but yet they're still the rulers of the temple, because they're concerned with temple life, but their emphasis is not on the religious matter or the spiritual matter. Their emphasis is always on what? The politics of the temple, the decisions of the temple. So you find that they covered, a broad spectrum of Jewish life in those days.
Pastor, I come upon one word and I find it 3 times in the Bible. I don't know if it's more, but I'm going to read one word.
Mm-hmm.
In John, you could find it in John 7:1 and in Luke 23, verse 5. And they were the more fierce, saying, he stirred up the people, teaching throughout all Jewry. So that word, Pastor, I want to know exactly.
Which word? Jewry?
Jewry, yeah.
Well, when they say Jewry, that's just a collective term of putting Jews together as a people. So Jewry would be just, a broad category of saying the Jews, a Jewish system of belonging. So just a broad category of the Jewish people in general. I can probably equate that one word and say the Jewish people, among the Jewish people. That's how I see that the word. And again, when we think about Jewish, we are not thinking about just religious, but we are thinking about national as well, because the Jewish, is about the nationality of the people as well. So I think that word Jewry just referred to the people in general.
From the Jewry, like Judah.
No, I think the word is more not Judah, because Judah, remember, Judah becomes a place. Okay. So Jewry is not just like a place like Judah. It is speaking more of the people. Okay. Speaking more of the people than it speaks of a place. So it's not a location. It's more the people. I give you an example. We use a term today, African American, right? And you and I, many of us are from the Caribbean, but sometimes we fill out application and forms, and when we check something off, you know, the only option there for us is what? African American. You know, and so what we often do is that, you know, while we may say, well, you know, I'm a Caribbean American, you know, we put all of ourselves in that category. And so you have African American, but within that broad spectrum of African American, you have Haitians American and Jamaican American and Grenadian American and Vincentian American, but we all see ourselves for the, you know, for all sense and purposes in that broad category as African American. And so Jewry, I think, refers to people, not necessarily place, which I think would include both religious and national as well within that broad term.
Pastor, I thought the last time you studied, you said we was going to go to John the Baptist and see why you go in the wilderness. But I think you switch on us tonight.
Yeah, because I wanted to get through this, especially when we talk about the Essenes and these various sects, before we get to John the Baptist. We're going to get to John the Baptist. I know you're ready for John the Baptist.
I study up on it. Yeah.
you love John the Baptist. But as I was looking at it, I thought that maybe we talk a little bit about, you know, Judaism as a system, and John the Baptist. We'll spend some time with John the Baptist because John the Baptist, in a lot of sense, helps us to understand, the context in which Jesus lived and taught. And I was studying that. This is why I was able to say, you know, there are some who believe that he was an Essene, but when you study the broader picture of John, it's very unlikely that he is not necessarily, from my conclusion, not necessarily, an Essene. He may have had some practices of the Essene, but I don't think he was fully an Essene. All right. So this I hope this was instructive. Again, we share this so that as you read the Bible, it gives you a lot of contextual background. Spend a little time, slow down when you look at some passage, ask questions. When there's something that is not too clear, it is important to go and kind of spend some time and understanding, what is happening. I had a professor who used to say, in school, that when you read a text, try to immerse yourself in the text, taste what they're tasting, smell what they're smelling, feel what they're feeling. It is only when you're able to put yourself in that place that you can really come away with, a good understanding of the text.
Okay.
All right. So we're gonna close with that, and as we look forward, I think see if we can get to John the Baptist, Sister Anglin, the next time we meet. We're gonna have a break again because next Sabbath we have Dr. Smith with us, and so when we pick it up from here, we see what we can pick up as we continue to think about the Word of God. Thank you again.
I just want to say thank you again because I do love these foundation studies that gives you a solid foundation of the entirety of it. I do like them. Thanks.
Sister Fuller, Judah's father name was Simon too.
Hey.
Like Simon was a very common name.
Yeah, I'm just saying I do like the studies. I've been enjoying them. Thank you.
All right. And I think Brother John, you asked about the Herodians. The Herodians. One of the reasons why I say the Herodians as a group are mainly concerned with political power. But the reason why I say they're broad spectrum, because remember, like the Sadducees, they are also concerned with political power. So you can have individuals who can carry both both identity, because they're concerned with, establishing certain political parties as well. And so the Herodians are concerned with that power, again, coming down from those various patriarchies with the sons of Herod to establish that power. And they establish that power within the name of Judaism as well, because they're trying to play both ways to win with both, which never really works. And so thank you again, everyone. Just want to encourage you to come again tomorrow evening and join us for Sunday night prayer time. I know sometimes it's demanding on time, but think of it as spending just a little bit of time as you finish your day, as you interrupt your day, spend an hour with us in prayer. And I know that you will be blessed. You'll be blessed for that again. Join us tomorrow. Our guest will be Pastor Harris from Brooklyn, will be our guest speaker and spend some time with us in prayer. So come by tomorrow at 7:30 and join us. We ask of you to please take some time and invite someone to a revival beginning next Sabbath morning. Go into your contact, go into your Facebook, or whatever you have, and share that flyer with someone so that they can be a part of what is happening. And just I want to close before I ask Elder Ann to pray for us to close. I want to encourage you this week to take some action. We are concerned as Seventh-day Adventists, especially here at Hempstead, about community. And so I'll say to you that if you haven't done the census as yet, there is an extension of the census. If you have a relative or friend that have not filled out the census, please encourage them to do so. It makes a difference of the community services that we receive in our communities. And so please encourage with that extension. For those who have not done it yet, take advantage and fill out the census. But also,
Pastor, can I give you just a little information on that? Each individual in your home is worth $2,700. So if you have 5 people in your house, you're looking at basically $13,000 that you could be contributing to your community to go towards teachers, police, clinics, parks, and the necessary things you want. And sometimes we in our community say we don't get certain things is because we do not put our foot out and do what we need to do to get it done. I guarantee in the neighborhood that are elites and they're getting certain things, they go out and do their census.
Thank you, Sister Fuller. So we want to encourage you, if you haven't done so, to do so for those very same reasons. But we want to, encourage you, as we are in this nation at such a time that take full advantage of your voting rights, and as a citizen, go out and exercise those rights. If you have not registered to vote, I want to encourage you to do so. This is not a political speech, but this is just part of the responsibility that we have as a community. And so I want to encourage you to take full advantage, of part of this process, because in so doing, we are able to contribute and to participate in what happens in our community. And so I'm going to ask Elder Ann if you can so much pray for us as we go into this new week, that we'll continue to seek God and trust God in all that we do.
Let us pray. Heavenly Father, we thank you once again for the lessons that we have learned today, this morning and this evening. We pray that as we study your word, that we will delve into it slowly so that we can absorb all the information that you will impart to us so that we can impart to others. And help as we go about our week, that you may be with us, you may guide us and protect us. Keep us safe, we pray, in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful evening, and God's willing, join us tomorrow at 7:30. God bless. Be safe and be well.